Hello, and here we are in front of door number 16 on the TooFatLardies Advent Calendar for 2019. Today we're back with Sydney, and Sid is going to be telling us all about his favourite wargames period.
My favourite wargaming period is perhaps without doubt the late 17th century and the wars of Louis XIV. It's an absolutely terrific period for anyone who's interested in military history and in particular in early modern warfare. And that's really because the period is one of real military revolution. There are significant changes between 1650 and 1700 in how battlefield armies are organised and how they fight. It's really a change in a lot of respects from impact warfare to firearm warfare. But it happens at a time that the transition isn't always clearly seen. So you have a wide variety of different troops and different tactics which you can replicate on the tabletop. It's also a period where campaigning starts to really change. Armies which are based on entrepreneurial, mercenary and enterpriser contracts are giving way to state-financed campaigning, where armies formed by centralised governments battle it out, and smaller principalities offer their soldier regiments for hire. Living in the UK, it's a great war and period to look at as regards visiting the locations of battles, some of the towns which were subject to sieges, and the different nations which took part. And for anyone who's a fan of going to France and the French way of life, well, Louis XIV and Versailles and other places like Vaux-le-Vicomte right at the start of anyone's tour of different parts of France. I think it's also a really colourful period. There's not the excesses of lace that you sometimes find in 18th century armies, but the uniforms and the standards are really striking, and they really paint up quite easily and vividly on the tabletop. And perhaps there's an element that the armies of Louis XIV and the opponents of Louis XIV, they're not as well known as those of, say, the Marlburian period or the 7 Years' War or the Napoleonic period. And that also, having a period which is perhaps in wargaming terms is a little bit of an underdog, is something which I also find really quite attractive. There's a lot of games which you can produce as wargaming scenarios from the accounts of battle, right from small skirmishes to sieges to significant major battles and anything in between, really. I often like the period of horse and musket wargaming because it just feels so classic. There's elements there of Donald Featherstone and Charles Grant and Charlie Wezencraft, and you feel when you're designing and playing games set within that period or collecting forces for that late 17th century period, that you're really standing alongside a lot of the greats of wargaming that have really made that period accessible as something which can be reduced to the tabletop. And I very much like that feel that it's part of that lodestone, that North Pole star that sometimes we think of in the hobby as representing horse and musket wargaming. I also like the fact that it's become a period which has been opened out by a lot of figures becoming available within the last 10 years. Paradoxically, maybe my favourite figures for the period are those from Dixon Miniatures and Wargames Foundry, which have been around about 30 years. But it's a period which has been opened up with some great figures from Front Rank and also Warfare Miniatures from Barry Hilton's company. And I think that that's fantastic. And also in the smaller scales, Pendraken and also Pete Berry at Backers has been producing figures which are suitable for the period. And I think that bodes really well for the future for people who are starting to become interested in the period. So, for anyone wanting to give it a go, I'd thoroughly recommend the late 17th century, and in particular, the Wars of Louis XIV as a fantastic wargaming project.
Remember, Lard is for life and not just for Christmas.